So after you open a file and create a file object, you can use some of the methods outlined below to read data from the file. You can use a for statement to get the data from the lines in the file object. In the upcoming slides, the examples will show how all of this works. You can use read lines, and you can use read line. Read will read the entire file and returns its content as a string. Read lines will basically reads the entire file and returns it as a list. Read line will read the next line in the file and returns its contents as a string. You also have a couple of other methods that you can use, including next, seek, and tell. So tell will tell you where Python is within the file's current position. Seek will actually set the file's current position, and then next returns the next line from the file each time it is being called. So, for instance, if you want to append, lines. Let's say you have 6 lines, right? And you want to append lines in between lines 3 and 4. What you can do is you can seek to the third line and then append data to that line. Tell will tell the program where you're at within the current position. If you're like seeking to a position or iterating through a position, and the next basically allows you to return the next line within some kind of iterator. So if you're in a for loop, you can say read line and then next, and then read line and then next, and then read line and then next, and so on and so forth. The 3 methods that we're going to be using here, though, are going to be read lines, and read lines, so you get an idea as to how these work. Specifically, we'll be using these 3 methods over the other 3 at the bottom here. But just wanted to let you know that these also exist in case you need to, for instance, put text between, 100 lines of code, for instance. So here's how you can use a for statement to read each line of a file. So notice in this case we have the with statement, of course, to open the file and close it, right? We're reading employees.txt, which should now contain 2 employees. Then what we do is we say for line in file, and then we print the line, and then at the end we print basically essentially no separator, and then a space here to give us a new line break. So rather than doing a backslash in or something of the sort, what we're doing is just basically printing a blank space. So let's go ahead and see how this works here. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and add a comment here. We'll say using a for statement to read each line of the file. And then what we'll do is we'll say with open, and of course we have employees.txt already created. Again, we don't need the mode added here because R is the default, and since we're reading, it's just assumed that since R is the default, okay, we don't need to add it because it's just we're reading, right? So the R, it'll just be R by default. Okay, so we don't need to add it there. You can if you want to be thorough, but you don't really need to. So for line in file, and then we'll go ahead and print line, and then end our blank space separator, and then we'll add a line break after this, or a blank space. So we'll run it, and you'll see that we get Sally Smith, and then right after that we get Mark Jacobson. So this print statement here is adding some space underneath it. Technically, we don't need it. If you run it without it, okay, you'll see it still works, and it doesn't add as much space underneath. So I'm just adding it there just because I'm kind of fanatical about adding, after this is done, I want to add space so that when I perform my next operation, there's enough space underneath my previous one to go about my business. But again, it's not a requirement. Okay, so that's the, as you can see, a for loop. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at how to use the read method. Okay, so notice in this case, what we're doing is we're reading the entire file as a string. So what we're doing is we're dumping everything within the employees.txt file into a variable called contents, and then what we're doing is we're basically printing that, right? So let's see how this works. So we'll go ahead and add a comment here. We'll say reading the entire file as a string, and then we'll say with open, and then you know what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and copy this line just to make it easy on myself. And again, we don't need the R mode because it's just assumed that we're reading. And then we'll say file.read, and then we'll just go ahead and print contents. And of course, if you wanted to simplify your code a little bit, you could just basically take this and put it inside of the print function. But this is a little cleaner in my opinion. Run it. Of course, we get the same thing. Okay, so this is an example using a for loop, an example using the read method. Okay, so let's take a look at how to use the read lines method to accomplish the same thing. Okay, so notice in this case what we're doing is we're reading the entire file as a list. So what we do is we call the read lines method of the file object. What that does is that returns a new list called employees, and since now employees is a list, we have to basically reference each position within the list, right? 0 would be Sally Smith, 1 would be Mark Jacobson. Of course, this probably isn't the most efficient way of doing this because this is assuming we have 2 employees, right? I mean, what if we have 100 employees? What are we going to, are we going to write 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth? Not the most efficient way of doing it, but it gives you an idea as to how to use read lines. What we could do is we could dump this within a for loop, right, and read to the end of the file, and then basically change this to be like the numeric iterator instead, right? And that would be a little bit more efficient. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll say reading the entire file as a list. And with open employees, we'll just do the same thing essentially. And then employees equals file.readlines. And then we'll go ahead and print employees. And then in brackets, we'll go 0. And then end nothing at the end. And then print. And then we'll do 1 employees. 1. There we go. All right, so let's see what we get. Oh, this is spelled wrong. There we go. All right, so let's run it, and again, we get the same thing, right? So same exact thing. So this is an example of using read lines. The last one we're going to look at is how to use read line to read basically each line of the file. And again, we only have 2 here, so this will be really easy to work with. But if we had 100 lines, this would be a little bit, we'd have to figure out a different way of doing this, right? So you can see here that we do employee 1 equals file.readline, and then we'll print that, and then employee 2 equals file.readline, and then we print that, right? So it's a little bit, it's very similar to the one above it. Reading each line of the file. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and paste that in, and we'll go employee 1 equals file.readline, and then we'll go ahead and copy that because we're going to use it again. We'll go ahead and call this employee 2, and then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say print, and then we'll say print employee 1. And end equals that, and then we'll go ahead and copy that, and then we'll paste that in, print employee 2, and then we don't need the end separator. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and give that a shot, and of course we get the exact same thing. So several ways there, in fact, of reading content within a text file, using a for loop, using the read method, using the read lines method, and then using the read line method. So 4 ways of reading from a text file. So which method you use is completely up to you, whichever you think is most efficient, whichever option works best for your situation is the direction that you're going to want to go.